In the middle of a probate hearing, my own daughter stood up, looked the judge dead in the eye, and said my late husband's wishes didn't matter because I was no longer competent to understand them. What she didn't know was that the manila folder sitting on the table in front of me held a federal subpoena with her name on it, signed by an assistant U.S. attorney who happened to owe me nothing and respect me a great deal. My name is Tessa Lindquist. I'm 33 years old, and I spent 11 years as a combat flight medic before a transport helicopter put me on the ground for good. I was sitting in a courtroom in Asheville, North Carolina, the kind of building with marble floors that throw your footsteps back at you, like an accusation, and the air smelled like floor wax and somebody's expensive cologne. I had my hands flat on my thighs, not folded, flat. Folding your hands is what you do when you're praying or when you're scared, and I was neither. My daughter Marlo stood at the petitioner's table in a cream blazer that still had the fold lines from the box. She'd bought it for this. Beside her sat her husband, a man I'll just call the son-in-law because giving him a name feels like more than he earned. He had that real estate smile, the one that's all teeth and no eyes, and he kept resting his hand on Marlo's back like he was steadying a horse before a race. Marlo didn't even look at me when she started. That's the part that hollowed me out. She looked at the judge, at her lawyer, at the court reporter, at the little gallery of strangers who'd wandered in off the hallway. Everyone but me, Your Honor, she said, and her voice did this trembly thing she used to do when she was 9 and wanted out of trouble. I love my mother. I do. That's why this is so hard. But the war changed her. The crash changed her. She's not the same person who raised me, and I can't sit by and watch her give away everything my father built, because she can't tell what's real anymore. I want to tell you, my heart broke. It didn't. It went cold and quiet the way it used to go cold and quiet when the bird took fire, and I had 30 seconds to decide who I could save. You don't feel anything in those moments. You just start counting. Their lawyer was a soft-handed man from Charlotte who said if it pleased the court, like it was a brand of cigarette. He nodded to the clerk, and the screen on the wall lit up. There I was. It was security footage, the grainy kind, time-stamped 2 a.m. I was standing in the parking lot of a VA hospital in the rain, alone, my lips moving. No sound, just a woman in a soaked jacket talking to the dark. The footage was steady and patient in the way that only footage taken by someone who paid for it can be. She does this, the son-in-law's lawyer said, gentle as a funeral. She wanders at night. She talks to people who aren't there. And that's when I understood how clean their work was. Because I remembered that night. That was the 11th of October. That was the anniversary of the day we lost Specialist Reyes and Doc Tran and a kid we just called Tennessee because nobody could pronounce his last name. I go to that parking lot every year. I stand under the overhang and I say their names out loud, one at a time. Because if I don't say them, then there's nobody left who will. Reyes. Tran. Tennessee. I tell them I made it home. I tell them I'm sorry it was me and not them. That's not madness. That's the only church I've got left. They turned my prayer into evidence. Then their lawyer set a thick stack of paper on the bench with a soft, deliberate thud, a psychiatric evaluation. The letterhead was from some glass and chrome wellness clinic up near Biltmore Forest, where the money lives, signed by a doctor whose name I'd never heard in my life. I could read the big words from where I sat. Complex PTSD. Cognitive impairment, paranoid ideation, diminished capacity. Each one was a little nail, and they were building me a box. I watched the judge's face change. He'd come in looking bored, the way they do. By the time the report hit the bench, he was looking at me the way you look at a stray dog that might be sick, softness, and distance at the same time. The whole room shifted. The court reporter, the bailiff, the strangers in the back. I wasn't Tessa Lindquist anymore. The woman who'd pulled men twice her size out of burning metal. I was a poor, broken veteran who'd finally cracked. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Lindquist, he said, slow and kind. The way you talk to someone you've already decided about. Is there anything you'd like to say? There was. There was an entire war I wanted to say, but I just looked at him and then I looked at my daughter and I said nothing. My silence wasn't surrender. It was the most contempt I knew how to fit into one room. It was the held breath before the thing you can already hear coming. Because this wasn't the first time someone in that family tried to erase me. It just took me 33 years to stop letting them. To understand how I ended up in that chair, you have to go back to a double-wide trailer outside Spruce Pine, North Carolina, where I grew up in a house that was really two houses stacked on top of each other. There was my mother's house, full of cigarette smoke and the TV always on, and there was the house I'd built inside my own head where things were quiet and made sense. My father left when I was 4. I don't remember his face, just the sound of the screen door and the way my mother went still afterward, like a clock somebody forgot to wind. I learned early that I was the kind of kid people looked past. Teachers, neighbors, the women at church who'd cluck their tongues. Quiet girl. Strange girl. The girl who'd rather take apart the toaster than play with the other kids. I wasn't sad about it, not really. You can't miss a warmth you've never felt. You just learn to make your own. I joined the Army at 19 because the recruiter was the first adult in my whole life who looked me in the eye and said I could be good at something. I trained as a flight medic, which is a fancy way of saying they put you in a helicopter and ask you to do impossible math at 140 knots. Who lives, who waits, who's already gone. I was one of a small handful of women doing the job. The men gave me hell for about a month. Then we took fire over a ridge in the Hindu Kush, and I kept a sergeant's chest from caving in with my 2 bare hands until we got him down, and after that, nobody had anything to say about whether I belonged. I met my husband at a base in Georgia. His name was different from anything I'd known. Gentle, patient, a logistics officer who could make a whole battalion supply chain run like a clock and still remember which of his soldiers had a kid's birthday coming up. I'll just call him my husband because the name belongs to me and not to this story. He was the first person who ever made me feel like quiet wasn't a defect. We had Marlo 2 years into the marriage. Here's the thing, nobody tells you about being the parent who deploys. You miss the version of your child that the other parent gets. My husband got the bedtime stories and the first steps and the lost teeth. I got the video calls where Marlo would hold the camera too close to her face and tell me about her day in a rush, and then run off because being 4 is a busy job. I told myself I was building her a future. A house, a college fund, a name that meant something. I told myself the years I missed were an investment. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I wasn't wrong about loving her. I need you to know that. Whatever I tell you next, I loved that girl with everything the war left me. My husband died when Marlo was 16. Not overseas. A drunk driver on Route 19 on a Tuesday, coming home from buying her a birthday cake. The kind of death that has no honor in it, no flag, no folded triangle. Just a phone call and a bakery box still in the back seat. I came home for good after that. I traded the helicopter for a kitchen table and a teenage girl who looked at me like I was a stranger who'd been hired to replace her father. I tried. God knows I tried. But I didn't know how to be the soft parent. I knew how to keep people alive in a crisis, not how to talk a 17-year-old through a breakup. We collided more than we connected. And the whole time, there was money in the background, more than people knew. My husband had been smart. There was a life insurance payout, and an investment account he'd built quietly for 20 years, and the deed to a piece of land outside Asheville that turned out to be worth more every single year as the city crept toward it. By the time Marlo was grown, the estate was worth a little over $2 million, sitting in a trust with my name on it as administrator, until she turned 35. That land is what this is really about. That's what I should have understood sooner. Marlo married the son-in-law 3 years ago. I didn't like him from the first handshake, and I'm honest enough to admit a mother can be wrong about that. But I wasn't wrong. He came from a family that talked about money the way some people talk about the weather, constantly, anxiously, like it might turn on them. He had a development company that was 3/4 debt and 1/4 Cologne, and he looked at that land outside Asheville the way I imagine a man looks at a winning lottery ticket that somebody else is holding. It started small. Marlo calling more often, suddenly worried about my health. Was I sleeping? Was I eating? Did I think it might be time to talk to someone about the nightmares? Then it was a family financial advisor the son-in-law knew who really thought we should simplify the estate structure. Then it was Marlo crying on my couch, saying she just wanted to make sure I was protected, that the world takes advantage of women alone, that maybe I shouldn't be managing all that money by myself with my condition. I didn't have a condition. I had grief, and I had nightmares some weeks, and I had a ritual in a parking lot once a year. That was the whole inventory. I should have seen the shape of it, but here's what they count on. The people who do this, they count on you loving them too much to believe it. I'd missed 16 years of that girl's childhood. When she sat on my couch and cried and said she just wanted to take care of me, every cell in my body wanted to believe I was finally getting to be her mother. So I let her drive me to appointments. I let her sit in on the meetings. I let her, God help me, introduce me to a therapist she'd found. A soft-spoken man up near Biltmore Forest who asked me a lot of questions about whether I ever felt disconnected from reality and wrote things down that I never got to see. You know how this part goes. The petition for guardianship landed in my mailbox on a gray Thursday. Marlo, my own daughter, was asking a court to declare me incapacitated and put her in control of everything. The estate, the land, the life my husband died building. Me. I sat at my kitchen table with that petition for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to tell you I had some noble reaction, but the truth is I felt something colder and more useful than grief. I felt the old math click back on. Who lives? Who waits? Who's already gone? And I understood, the way I used to understand it over a ridge with the rotors screaming, that nobody was coming to save me. I'd have to do the impossible thing myself. So I did what I'd been trained to do. I stopped reacting and I started gathering. Here's what they didn't know about me, what they couldn't have known because they never once asked. After the crash that ended my service, the Army didn't just put me out to pasture. The work I'd done, 11 years of it, in places that don't show up on the news, meant I had friends, not the kind you call on a bad day, the kind you call on the worst day. One of them was a woman I'd trained with who'd gone on to the JAG Corps and was now a federal prosecutor. Another ran security investigations for a firm that contracted with the VA. And the man who'd been my pilot the day I nearly died had spent his medical retirement becoming a forensic accountant, of all the unlikely things, because he said he was tired of bleeding and wanted to make rich liars bleed instead. I made some calls. It took 4 months. 4 months of letting Marlo think she was winning. 4 months of going to the appointments, of saying, yes, sweetheart, and if you think that's best, of letting that fake therapist write his fake notes, while underneath the table, the people I trusted most in the world quietly pulled the son-in-law's life apart thread by thread. What we found was uglier than I'd let myself imagine. The son-in-law's development company was insolvent. He'd been moving money between shell entities to hide it from his own investors, which is not just unethical. It's wire fraud, and wire fraud is federal. The financial advisor, who wanted to simplify my estate, was his college roommate, unlicensed, already under investigation in 2 states, and the psychiatric evaluation, the centerpiece of their whole case, had been written by a man who had taken $60,000 from the son-in-law's company, routed through a fake consulting invoice, 3 weeks before he ever wrote a word about me. He'd never administered a single one of the tests he claimed to. My pilot, the accountant, found the wire in an afternoon. He said it was almost insulting how lazy they'd been. The guardianship case and the fraud case turned out to be the same case. They just didn't know it yet. I could have blown it up early. I could have walked into Marlo's house and laid it all on the table. But I'd learned something in 11 years of medicine that I think most people never learn. Timing is everything. You don't move a casualty before you've stopped the bleeding. You don't fire before you have the shot. I let them walk all the way into the courtroom. I let them put their grainy footage on the screen and their fake report on the bench. I let the son-in-law's lawyer call my prayer for my dead a symptom. I sat there with my hands flat on my thighs, and I let them think they'd won, because a thing only breaks clean when it breaks at the very top of its arc. Mrs. Lindquist, the judge said again, when my silence had gone on long enough to make him uncomfortable, if you have nothing to add, I'm prepared to. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to enter one document into evidence. My counsel has copies for the court and for opposing parties. You could feel the room tilt. Marlo's head snapped toward me. The son-in-law's smile flickered, just for a second, like a bulb about to go. My lawyer, the JAG friend, who had taken personal leave to stand beside me in a suit instead of a uniform, but was the bearing you never lose, handed the folders up. One to the judge, one to the son-in-law's lawyer, who opened it and went the specific gray of a man watching his career arrive at a cliff. That is a federal subpoena, I said, issued this morning by the United States Attorney's Office for the Western District of North Carolina. It names my son-in-law as a target in an ongoing wire fraud investigation. The second document is an affidavit from the physician who signed the evaluation you've been reading, attesting that he was paid to write it and that he never examined me. I kept my voice level, the way you keep it level on the radio when everything around you is on fire. The third is a sworn statement from a licensed forensic psychiatrist, court-appointed, neutral, examined me last week, finding me of completely sound mind. The judge read, "The room did that thing rooms do when something real happens in them, where all the small sounds stop at once." The son-in-law's lawyer leaned over and whispered something urgent, and the son-in-law shook his head, and Marlo just stared at me, and I watched the story she told herself for 4 months start to come apart behind her eyes. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 men came in. Not soldiers, not a dramatic squad of brays. This is real life, and real life is quieter and somehow worse for it. They were a U.S. Marshal and an investigator from the prosecutor's office, in plain suits with the kind of calm that comes from doing this for a living. They walked up the center aisle, and the marble threw their footsteps back, the way it had thrown mine, and the son-in-law stood up so fast his chair scraped, and for one wild second I genuinely thought he might run. He didn't run. People like him never do, in the end. They just go pale and start saying lawyer over and over like it's a prayer of their own. The judge slammed his folder shut. "We are in recess," he said. "Counsel my chambers. Now." And then, more quietly, to the marshal, "Do what you need to do." They read the son-in-law his rights right there, in front of God and the gallery and his wife, while the court reporter typed it all into the permanent record. I won't pretend I didn't feel something watching it. I'd be lying. There's a part of me that had wanted this for 4 months, that had pictured it. But the thing about getting what you want is that it never feels the way you thought it would. It just feels heavy. Marlo turned to me. Her face had gone through anger and fear and landed somewhere I hadn't seen since she was small. That lost, scrambling look of a child who's done something she can't undo. "Mom," she said. "Mom, I didn't. He told me it was just to protect. I didn't know about any of." "I know," I said. "And the awful part is, I did know. I believed her. I'd spent 4 months looking at the evidence, and the evidence said the son-in-law had used my daughter the same way he'd used everyone else, that he'd handed her a story about my madness and let her grief and her fear do the rest. She wasn't a villain. She was just a woman who'd been so afraid of losing her last parent that she let a man convince her the way to keep me was to cage me. That didn't make it hurt less, but it made it possible to do what I did next, which was the hardest thing in the whole courtroom, harder than the silence, harder than the subpoena. You took my husband's wishes and you put them on a screen and called them sickness. I told her, quiet enough that only she could hear. You took the one prayer I have left and you tried to make it evidence against me. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to put you on a screen. But I need you to understand something. I spent 11 years deciding who I could save, and I'm telling you right now, I can still save you, but only if you let me. Not him. Me." She started to cry, the real kind, the kind without a camera on it. The case against the son-in-law took the better part of the year. He took a plea in the end, the way they almost always do, and he's somewhere now doing the math on a sentence instead of a development deal. The guardianship petition was dismissed within a week, with the judge entering a finding on the record that I was fully competent, and a second finding, in language I had to read 3 times to believe, that the petition had been brought in bad faith. The fake psychiatrist lost his license. The financial advisor is facing his own charges in 2 states. The land outside Asheville is still mine, and it's still climbing, and someday it'll be Marlo's, free and clear, the way her father wanted. Marlo and I are not fixed. I want to be honest with you, because I think the worst thing these stories do is promise you a clean ending. We are not the mother and daughter. We might have been, if I'd been home for all those years, if her father had lived, if a man with a winning smile hadn't found the crack between us and driven a wedge into it. But we talk now, real talking. She came with me to the VA parking lot this past October, and she stood under the overhang in the rain and she listened while I said their names. Reyes, Tran, Tennessee. When I was done, she didn't tell me it was crazy. She asked me to tell her about them, so I did. We stood there until the rain let up, and I told my daughter about 3 men she'll never meet, who I think about every single day, and for the first time in 16 years, It felt like she was actually getting to know her mother. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry. At Marlowe, at the son-in-law, at a system that almost let a man with a fake report and a sad story erase a woman who'd given 11 years to her country. And the honest answer is no, not anymore. Anger is a fuel, and it'll get you off the ground, but it'll burn you to the airframe if you ride it too long. What I am instead is awake. I spent my whole life being the kind of person other people looked past. The quiet girl, the strange one, the broken veteran, and I learned, in the hardest way there is, that being underestimated is not the same as being weak. Sometimes it's the only armor you've got. They thought the silence meant I had nothing to say. They were wrong. The silence was me reloading. The thing I keep coming back to, even now, is that none of it would have worked if I'd moved 1 minute too soon. For 4 months, I sat in those appointments and said, "Yes, sweetheart," and let a man with a winning smile believe he was already counting the money. That patience nearly killed me some nights. But here's what I learned over 11 years of deciding who I could save and who I couldn't. The worst mistake you can make in a crisis is acting before you understand it. I gathered before I struck. I let the truth get heavy enough that no fake report could lift it off me. That wasn't cleverness for its own sake. It was the only path that ended with Marlowe still standing in the room instead of standing in a cell beside her husband. I think a lot about why the son-in-law nearly won. It wasn't because he was smart. It was because he'd decided long ago that other people's grief was just a tool, and that a woman alone was a thing you could quietly take apart. He never once asked who I really was. That's the trap that catches people like him every single time. They mistake silence for emptiness. They mistake gentleness for weakness. And so they never see the steel until it's already at their throat. What you let yourself become on the inside, when nobody is watching and there's nothing to gain. That's the thing that decides whether you survive the worst day of your life. He let himself become hollow. I'd spent my whole life filling myself up with the names of people I refused to forget. If there's anything I'd hand to my daughter, and to you, it's 3 things I had to learn the hardest way there is. Stay honest, even when a lie would be easier, because the truth is the only thing that can't be bought out from under you. They paid $60,000 for a lie, and it still crumbled the moment it met one real document. Keep your mind sharp and your eyes open, because love should never make you stop looking. I almost lost everything precisely because I wanted so badly to believe my own child. And do not break. Bend, wait, count, breathe their names in the rain if that's what it takes. But do not break, because the people who underestimate you are betting their whole game on the assumption that you will. Marlowe stood in that VA parking lot with me this past October and listened to me say 3 names into the dark. Reyes. Tran, Tennessee. She didn't call it madness. She asked me to tell her about them. And that's how I know we'll be all right. The 2 of us. Not fixed, not the way we might have been, but awake to each other for the first time in 16 years. They thought my silence meant I had nothing left to say. It only ever meant I was reloading.